Well, thank you for coming. Welcome to tonight's White House briefing. I have a few opening comments. Now, I had a chance to be a part of something amazing, intimate conversations with the administration on the Middle East in general terms, but more specifically, the American-Israel relationship. My experiences from late April to mid-May are something I will never forget. And I can't wait to share it with you tonight. And maybe that's a good point to remember. Please turn off your cell phones as I did. Okay? Now let me explain how I'd like this evening to go. I'll begin with a little bit of background as to what brought these meetings about and how I, a rabbi in a very small Jewish community, and you know how small Charleston is, got to be one of just 15 rabbis invited to the White House. Then I want to share with you the substance of what I heard. I can't possibly give you everything in what amounted to probably 3 hours plus of intense conversations, but I hope to give you some of the important ideas and views that were expressed. And that's also very hard because everything is filtered through a person's ears, so what I thought was unimportant, another person in attendance might have thought was critical. But my attempt is to try to let you feel that you were there and tell you what was said with as little editorial comment as possible. And then I want to offer you some very general conclusions before I open it up to you. So enjoy the first part, the background, because that's kind of cool. Listen to the second part and decide for yourself what was said and form some ideas of your own about the American-Israel relationship today under this administration. And then take the third part, my conclusions, with some healthy skepticism. And I say that because while I hope you will see I'm not going to be endorsing the administration or excoriating it, I will try to sift through the material and offer at least what I think are fair statements about the administration and the American-Israel friendship. If I get this right tonight, and there's no guarantee that I will, those who have been reasoned critics of the administration vis-a-vis its foreign policy toward Israel will acknowledge that some good things are being done, and that supporters of the administration will pause and realize that mistakes and missteps have been made, and there is still much work that needs to be done. And then after that, we have a microphone, and I'll let you talk and ask questions or make comments. But I'll get to that after my talk. Now, this amazing chapter in my life all started with a call from a Rabbi Jack Moline. The day after Passover, April 7th, I was contacted by Rabbi Jack Moline. He's a rabbi in Alexandria, Virginia. He serves on the Rabbinical Assembly as the Director of Public Policy. The Rabbinical Assembly is the conservative movement's rabbi's organization. He told me that his old friend, Rahm Emanuel, the Chief-of-Staff of the White House, was at his home for Seder, and they were talking about the loss of Jewish support for the administration. Rahm Emanuel asked Jack if he could get together a group of rabbis for him to have a conversation about this. Jack told me he was trying to get a good cross-section of rabbis from across the country, rabbis representing the various denominations and communities. And my name was suggested. Am I interested? Now let me pause, because when I heard that this wasn't a group of several hundred rabbis, but a little more than a dozen of us, I'll be honest, I was scratching my head at the invitation. I mean, I love Charleston like you do, but let's be honest. We are not Clearwater. We are not Boca Raton. We are not Atlanta. These are the rabbis that were selected. Philadelphia, Chicago, Las Vegas, even Birmingham. And when I heard who was going and the size of the Jewish communities they represented, I immediately felt either this was a huge mistake or I was being punked. I did not belong with such a prestigious group, and I say that with no false modesty. If you know me, I have a healthy ego, probably too healthy of one. But I felt this was an odd selection. Honored, but confused. Now, I think the reason I was asked was because of the reputation of this Jewish community and in our congregation despite its small size. I mean, we're a very active Jewish community, from activities that we have on a daily basis to the support we give to various national organizations. We are well known as a very prominent small Jewish community. The United Jewish Communities said that about us. APEC says that about us. And we are thought of, despite our size, as a community concerned and passionate about Israel and the Middle East. Just last week, we had a Dr. Jonathan Edelman, a professor of international studies from the University of Denver. He was discussing Iran and the United States-Israel relationship, and our social hall was packed. And Edelman was extremely impressed with our community, especially when I told him how many people are actually in Charleston. Despite our size, we accord ourselves very, very well. And I think as a result, I got noticed. So Jack told me that if I accept, and he needs to know as soon as possible so he can put all this together, I will not be representing any organization or group. I would be speaking for myself and from my own experiences. I know what my community is saying about the administration, and I should come and speak about the concerns I have and what I'm hearing. And that was the point of this meeting with Rahm Emanuel. I was also told to keep this between us, obviously letting only those in my community who absolutely have to know my whereabouts that day. Jack said to me that this is all going to be made public after our meeting, but Jack was trying to create something different than any other official group and individual that would be there for other soirees. This was not going to be part of the administration's charm offensive or photo op. Of course, everything in Washington, he said, is political. Everyone has an agenda. The administration, of course, has an agenda. But we were there to work, to report honestly on what we felt and what we were hearing, and then report back to our communities what we heard. Now, parenthetically, that would prove to be true. Not that I'm complaining, but we weren't even offered water or complimentary White House mints. And as to the photo ops, the only photos I have that prove that I was there were the ones that I secretly snuck in and took with my iPhone. I mean, this was a real private session to put our cards on the table, express our concerns, your concerns, and give the administration a chance to react and offer perhaps a different narrative. We wouldn't have to be careful about what was said or asked. There would be no expectations about what came out of this session. It would just be a conversation where we as rabbis, representing, if you will, a focus group of American Jews, who could talk, in Jack Moline's words, truth to power. And they would have a chance to talk back to us. Now, afterwards, Jack said he fully expected us then to be able to share our experiences with our community with no strings attached. So I was kind of shocked, shell-shocked, and I shared all this with first our executive director, Steve Max, and then our president, Eric Persley, both of whom said, "No way, that's amazing. You've so got to go." And so as a result, I started to prepare for my trip, which was scheduled to take place on April 20th. Along with reading much more material on the Middle East and becoming more accurately or acutely aware of what the administration was and was not doing, I began to think of what I would want to express to the White House. And I began to formulate two tracks in my mind: what I was thinking and what I felt the community was saying to me. Now, just for complete disclosure, and it's, for many of you it's not a complete disclosure, you know this, though I do not bring up my politics at services from the pulpit, I am on the left of center when it comes to Middle East foreign policy. And while I can't always leave that at the door, I try to see things from all angles and can hopefully restate all positions in a diplomatic fashion. So I tried to think how to accurately express what I was hearing from this community, the pro-Israel community. And the common thread I came up with, as I was hearing through our daily minyan breakfast table discussions, at kiddushes, at our weekly lunches with the guys, at the day-to-day conversations I had and emails I was receiving, the common thread I was hearing was that the president and this administration seems to be sending a much more conciliatory message toward the Muslim Arab world than he is toward our friend and ally, Israel. The president's relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been rather strained at times, and since the recent dispute over the permit approval of 1,600 apartments in Jerusalem, even hostile. And this has become of great concern to many in my congregation. In just 15 months under this administration, the strong friendship between these two countries appear to be changing in very short order. And as a result, when I would have a chance to speak, my first question was going to be along the lines of, I understand that the Obama administration is attempting to engage the Muslim and Arab world. And I understand and appreciate that dialogue is necessary and engagement is critical. But what I'm hearing and feeling is that these recent spats, public spats between the two countries, is creating an unfortunate narrative that this administration is distancing itself from Israel. The unshakable friendship between these two countries appears to no longer be on solid footing, and that's not helpful. Now, parenthetically, I would learn that that was the thinking of most of the other members of this focus group and what they felt the administration had to hear. Namely, why does it feel that the relationship between these two allies are not what they used to be just 2 years ago? In addition, there was a great deal of concern about the harsh stance the administration had taken toward the Israeli government regarding the building permits for apartments in a Jewish neighborhood in Jerusalem. As someone left of center, I understood the administration's concerns and could almost echo them. But at the same time, the reaction did seem out of proportion. These apartments were not settlements on the West Bank. They were apartments in a Jewish area in Jerusalem, home to nearly half of the city's Jewish population. The Prime Minister of Israel apologized several times for the unfortunate timing of the announcement. If you remember, it happened during Vice President Biden's visit to Israel when he was about to announce the resumption of indirect talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis. This strong condemnation and stripping down of Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was in the United States in March caused a great deal of pain and concern and outrage, even among Jews who believed that Israel had misstepped there. One of the rabbis of our group would, in our meeting directly with the Rahm Emanuel, very succinctly put her finger on the pulse of what we were hearing among the pro-Israel community. She provided for Emanuel an email that was circling around her congregation, which formed the basis for the first question we would then pose to the administration. Surely there must be something terribly wrong with an administration that seems to be more concerned with a Jew building a house in Jerusalem than a Muslim building a nuclear bomb in Iran. Now, right or wrong, that seemed to capture the sentiments that we were hearing. And so with these concerns, that's how we all came to Washington, the 15 of us. Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, McCain, Obama, and Clinton supporters, men and women from large communities and small, all trying to explain what we were hearing and what many of us were feeling in our communities. And as people who had no other agenda, we could talk, as you can see, very respectfully, but bluntly. It was not like we were an organization, and it wasn't like we were ever going to be invited back. We were just an ad hoc group, and this was our one shot at speaking truth to power. So we all met for the first time on April 20th in a magnificent private office with a spectacular view of Washington, D.C. for a pre-briefing, pre-meeting with Jack. Jack Moline knows people. This place was amazing. Now, Jack gave us a chance to introduce each other. This is all before we went to the White House. And then kind of explained to us what we could expect, though he didn't know for sure. He told us that we should, if we haven't already done so, jot down a couple of questions and additional questions or concerns that best reflect our take on the situation. And then he did something really neat, because he knows Rahm Emanuel pretty well. He role-played for us, him acting as Rahm Emanuel. So we could practice on what he might say, what we might say, and then what he might react when we asked him. And as I would discover, Jack does a pretty good job of acting as Rahm Emanuel. In fact, when we were in the White House and I was sitting next to Jack and near Emanuel, I probably shouldn't have done this during the meeting, but I was sitting next to Jack and near Emanuel at the meeting, and at one point I turned to Jack and said, "Hey, that guy plays a pretty good Jack Moline." What I appreciated about Jack Moline is that though he is a supporter of Barack Obama, his instructions to us were very telling and spoke volumes to me about the person that called me back on April 7th. He said, on one hand, this is a really cool thing that we're about to do. He said, on the other hand, he warned us that we 15 have an opportunity to be a positive force in the relationship between Israel and the United States, the Jewish community, and the President of the United States. Don't let this privilege blind you to the responsibility you have been given. We are not here to help the administration or to attack it. We are here to help the American-Israel relationship. And that stuck with me. I was there to strengthen the relationship between these two allies and do it in a respectful manner. So we left that beautiful private office overlooking Washington, D.C. at 2:30 in the afternoon for our 3 o'clock appointment. Passing through security was a breeze. Again, Jack is good. And once we received our visitor passes, we were on our way past the press staging area on the right and then the front lawn and walked right into the West Wing. Now, we were greeted right away by Susan Scher. She is Michelle Obama's Chief of Staff, but more importantly for this group, she's the liaison to the Jewish community. It's a position she shares with another lady, Danielle Boren, who's a special assistant to Joe Biden. She also joined us for the afternoon. Parenthetically, the Jewish liaison is a role that has existed as far back as the Carter administration. Scher escorted us into the Roosevelt room, the room right next to the Oval Office, and we each found a seat around that long table. And after a few minutes of talking with Scher about the history of the room, Ambassador Dennis Ross, not Rahm Emanuel, entered the room, shaking each of our hands before he began to talk to us. Now, this is a side note here. We were told that week that we were coming that we would be joined by this Ambassador Dennis Ross. And let me be honest with you, when I heard that, while we were there to talk to and speak to Emanuel, I was there to listen very intently to Ambassador Ross. Ross is probably one of the most distinguished diplomats in this country. He has worked, are you ready for this? He has worked with the Carter administration, the Reagan administration, under President George H.W. Bush and President Bill Clinton. He has been a Middle East envoy, the chief peace negotiator for this country. He helped the Israelis and Palestinians reach the 1995 interim agreement on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. He facilitated the Israel-Jordan Treaty of Peace. He is currently the special assistant to the president and, more importantly, the senior advisor for the Persian Gulf and Southwest Asia, which of course includes the entire Middle East and Iran. I'm currently reading, by the way, his book. It's a tremendous book, Myths, Illusions, and Peace. Get that book. This man has been involved in the Middle East and the search for peace for decades. And I'll tell you, when I shook his hand, I had goosebumps. Knowing who he has shooken hands with and what he's devoted his life was an honor. So the Roosevelt room didn't wow me. Rahm Emanuel didn't wow me. But being in the same room next to Ambassador Ross really did. Ross opened briefly by talking to us about Iran. the issue he's most involved in and the issue that takes up, he said, most of the administration's time. He says it's their number one priority. He explained that stopping Iran from becoming a nuclear-capable nation is the most pressing issue of the day. And this administration is working diplomatically to isolate Iran by garnering international support for meaningful sanctions that will force Iran to abandon her nuclear ambitions. Ross also told us, by way of introduction, that solving the Israel-Palestine issue is important because it takes a key piece off the board that the Iranians use conveniently to distract the Arab world from the real danger in the Middle East and the world, and that is a nuclear-empowered Iran. After a few minutes, Rahm Emanuel came in, every bit the person you think he's portrayed to be. Confident, somewhat brash and arrogant, tough, self-assured, and a very much take-charge type of guy. He told us, actually, he brought us all here to assure himself good high seats for the high holidays. And I thought to myself as he was talking that if they ever did a movie on the Obama administration, Robert Downey Jr. should so play this guy. Well, after some courtesies, Emanuel got right down to business. He told us he wanted to have a frank discussion on the issues and what is concerning American Jews. He launched into a very well-prepared and quite thorough discussion on what's going on currently with the administration and the Middle East. And let me share that with you very quickly. Emanuel spoke to us, he said, in the name of the President of the United States. And he said the President fully understands Israel's concerns. The Israelis entered bilateral discussions in the late 90s, and that led to the Intifada. They undertook their own unilateral actions in Gaza, leaving Gaza and southern Lebanon. That led to rocket attacks and missiles fired from Hamas and Hezbollah. We understand, he said, Israeli concerns, and we're trying to find another way. And with that in mind, he told us how this administration is approaching the Middle East. Number one, America knows Israel cannot make peace without a true sense of security. Number two, America knows that the Israel-American relationship is critical, and that is why, despite what is being reflected in the press, President Obama has spent more private time with Prime Minister Netanyahu than any other foreign minister. He says, look it up, foreign leader. Number three, Emanuel emphasized how this country continues to firmly stand behind her friend Israel. And he gave the examples of A, not participating in the Durban Conference, the conference on racism, that like in 2002 singled out Israel alone, as the racist country. And B, categorically rejecting the UN, United Nations Goldstone report, that accused Israel of war crimes in Gaza. There is no space, he said, no space between Israel and this country. Number four, this administration has a close working relationship with the Israeli military and the intelligence community there. Defense Minister Ehud Barak has been to Washington 5 times. Emanuel interjected, he knows that because all his Bud Lights are missing. Emanuel, number 5, emphasized that the administration has condemned both sides, not just Israel, for actions that create difficulties and give the other side an excuse to walk away from the proximity talks that they are desperately trying to establish. And finally, number 6, with regards to Iran, re-emphasizing what Ambassador Ross opened with, Iran is America's number 1 concern. This administration's goal is working feverishly to isolate and weaken Iran. Unilateral U.S. sanctions, he said, are never going to be as strong as world sanctions. And that's why Secretary of State Clinton and President Obama are tirelessly working that angle. Okay. Dennis Ross and Rahm Emanuel then gave us a chance to react. Now, I will say here, editorially speaking, neither as criticism or admiration, but as an observation, Emanuel's approach was masterful because he instantly changed the direction of the meeting and how it was going to proceed. I mean, we had this whole thing planned out at a pre-briefing, but he wanted to set the pieces up to his advantage. Here is what we're doing. Tell us now what we're doing wrong. What are you hearing? It put us, I think, in the defensive position, and was a move of a very, very polished politician. He was not going to put himself that afternoon in a defensive mode. And so this is how the conversation then continued. One of us started by saying that the perception among Jews is that Israel only, is being singled out and unfairly criticized. Israel is slammed for a permit for construction of apartments in Jewish Jerusalem, but not a word is being said to the Palestinians who name a street in Ramallah after a notorious terrorist. Why is only Israel condemned for acts that hurt the peace process and not the other side? We were told that the blame should be at the media, not the administration. The Palestinians were condemned and forcefully, but it was not picked up by the press. And they said it's typical of the way the media operates. Dog bites man, no story. Man bites dog, story. When we are critical, he said, of the Palestinian side, that's not news. But when we are critical of the Israeli actions, that's news. Now, they did admit that they were critical of the Israeli government for the apartment approval, but they reiterated that it's because the administration is trying to get both sides to avoid the sideshows, actions that allow the other party to find an excuse to walk out. At this point, Dennis Ross added a point that I admit some will probably disagree with tonight, but I do think it explains the administration's approach. He said, the gaps between the two parties are far less, the gaps between the Palestinians and the Israelis are far less than either side thinks, but the psychology is worse than ever. And that's what we as an administration are working on, the psychology of the region. If we can change the psychology of fear and mistrust, we can get the two sides to an agreement. And both sides need to avoid actions that reinforce mistrust. Approving of apartments, Dennis Roth said, in Jerusalem by an Israeli government on the very day proximity talks begin, and naming a street after a terrorist the week proximity talks begin, are not helpful to try to change the psychology of the Middle East. That's what we're trying to do. Another concern we raised was with the administration regarding linkage. Linkage is a view of the Middle East that the Arab-Israeli problem is the root cause of all the problems in the region. Solve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and everything is solved in the Middle East. We raised this because it's been widely reported that both President Obama in the New York Times and General David Petraeus have said that the Israeli-Palestinian issue puts the lives of our American troops directly at risk. It's as if Israel and that unresolved conflict with the Palestinians costs the United States blood and treasure. The two are linked. They bristled. They flat out denied that. They said that is not what we have ever said. They argued to us what was being said was that our involvement, was not that our involvement with Israel causes us problems, but rather the failure to solve the situation allows radical elements to use that conflict as a convenient way to recruit others. Going back to what Ross said earlier to us, he said there is no linkage, but a desire to remove a chess piece, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, off the table, a piece the other side conveniently plays to always avoid and distract from the real issue, and the real issue being the threat of Iran. Now, when it was my turn to talk, I said, as I mentioned earlier, that I understand that the American administration is trying to engage the Muslim world, like the Cairo speech in 2009, delivered by the president. And I can appreciate that. But what I'm hearing from my part of the world is that while the administration is working real hard to speak Arabic, not a bad thing, they are forgetting how to speak Hebrew. They are not speaking Hebrew. And the perception is that they are ignoring the Israeli population and the sensitivities of the pro-Israel community. Others added to what I was saying by reminding our host of the way Prime Minister Netanyahu was treated in March by the president. We seem to be seeing a change, a White House more interested in a relationship with the Muslim world than a relationship with Israel. And so to my question and to others who raised similar concerns, the administration emphasized that they are not involved in a relationship with the Muslim world at the expense of the relationship with Israel. This relationship remains unshakable, and the U.S. bond is unbreakable. They realize and they admit that there is a perception problem, and hence the reason for this outreach that they're doing now. However, they claim the relationship has not changed. The Netanyahu-Obama meeting in March was not as presented by the press. Netanyahu met with Obama for 2 hours that day. It was a private meeting. There were no photos, which is protocol. The talks were substantive, and conducted as friends and allies. And after their conversation, Obama went upstairs, and Netanyahu stayed to work with his staff based on what they heard from the administration. The Israelis called Obama back down after midnight with some new ideas and proposals, and he came down and spent another 30 more minutes. Now this, put it in context, this was despite the exhaustion of the day. That was the day of the national health care bill signing. And you know what Joe Biden said then too. Obama has spent, he said, and they said it again, more time with Netanyahu than any other foreign leader. This story of a snub is simply not completely accurate. Yet in the absence of news and reaction from the administration, the vacuum was filled with a different narrative. And they told us that they would have to do a better job telling the story of our country's relationship with Israel. Now, there were other issues raised at the first meeting, but I say first because unexpectedly, Emanuel said, let's meet again in a month. You tell us if we're not getting the narrative right. We'll invite you back in a month, and you tell us if we are getting the messaging right. Now, understand, this was a complete surprise to all of us. I was sitting next to Jack Moline, who started this whole thing, and I saw his face. He was completely shocked, and it was completely unexpected to him. But the offer appeared to be sincere. And since this was now going to be part of an ongoing dialogue for at least a month, we were asked to keep things low-key and off the record. If we would speak about the meeting, they asked that we do so in very, very general terms, focusing more on what we were observing on the ground and be ready to talk more in the follow-up. So for the next couple of weeks, we did just that, with more reading of what's happening, which included now receiving material from the administration, information they hoped showed the strength of the relationship between the administration and Israel. Of particular note to me was an address given by the National Security Advisor, James Jones, for the Washington Institute for Near